Uh, Good morning, everybody. My name is Manoj. I bring you greetings from Bangalore. I work for ITC Limited. It is not International Trade Commission. It is Indian Tobacco Company. It's one of India's most valuable corporations. It's a 108-year-old company, primarily in the business of tobacco, but also in the business of luxury hotels, cosmetics, foods, infotech, agro businesses, a variety. Let's understand the context behind an IPR approach by ITC. In its 108-year-old history, ITC has always controlled about 80% of India's tobacco and cigarette business. So patents would not give ITC any monopoly that it did not already enjoy. So the tobacco business could afford to be a little disdainful about patents. They say, okay, patents are nice to have, but not necessary to have. We were forced to cast aside a smug approach due to changes in the legal horizon. Lots of laws were impacting the tobacco business. There was a need to diversify into other businesses such as cosmetics and foods, where we did not have a monopoly. So much against our will, we were forced to look at the power of patents, the force multiplier kind of an effect that we would have. So ITC today sees intellectual property played at a variety of levels depending upon the nature of the business, the sensitivities of each business. And as a result, when we see how is IP deployed across an organization, we can see that in certain segments, the tobacco business operates in a very conservative, risk-averse mode. But the newer businesses are more open to embracing risk, accepting failures. So they adopt a more proactive, risk-taking approach to patents. And all this actually stems out from the combat doctrine of the organization. You say that these are our core areas. We will never tolerate patent infringement here. If anyone infringes our patents, we will go out and sue. But in other businesses where we are open to taking a little risks, we try to hedge those risks. We have a finance arm of the company called Russell Credit that underwrites all financial risks of this nature. I have only about 10 minutes, so I'll just breeze through all these slides. What happens if you don't own intellectual property? We realized very early, since the destiny of ITC was closely entwined with the destiny of India, that not owning sufficient intellectual property can hurt us country level, company level, group level, even individual level. So it was recognized very early on that if we have to maintain a strong competitive position and a position of great power and authority on trading platforms, we need to have the numbers. Not necessarily for the sake of having those numbers, but because of the amplification that this can bring to some of our businesses. And why is this important? Why am I projecting some of these slides here? Not because they are new in any way, but because ITC draws a lot of inspiration and learning from some of the success stories that other countries have adopted to, and see how we can adapt those same stories into an Indian context. Let's look at a brief history of patent economics, USA and Japan. This dates to mid-80s. A lot of technologies were being created in Japan and by a variety of industries, mechanical industries, Mitsubishi, Matsushita, Sony, Canon, all the automobile companies. Many of those products were being exported to the United States. Japanese companies were filing for patent in the US, but not so aggressively. Japanese companies were filing for patent in Japan, but not so aggressively in the US. On the contrary, the products that were covered by patents in Japan, when they reached American shores, there were organizations that filed for patent around the core technology nuggets, filed for them in the United States, also filed for them in Japan. As a result, despite the fact that great technology was being exported to the United States, there were royalties that Japanese companies had to pay simply because the Japanese products were not free to operate on the US shores. And this is serious cash here. We are talking of an exports bill of about $500 billion US, and look at the patent filing mismatch in the 80s. USA at that stage was about 40,000, and Japan was about less than 10,000. The Japanese companies realized very quickly what was going on, and they said, hey, this is something that we can fix. What did they do? They started filing for patents in the US also. And very quickly, the royalties that had to be paid to American companies were very quickly offset. Japanese companies reversed the situation in less than 5 years. This was the amplification that, and the power of patents that could really impact the business model, influenced intellectual property thinking in ITC in a very big way. And this has, it's basically articulated by a chairman saying that let's make acquisition of intellectual property a very passionate pursuit. It may appear that a lot of data that I'm presenting to you may be confidential, but it is not. A lot of this is available on Google. I mean, if you sit diligently with pen and paper for about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you can basically track down who's filing what kind of patents where. So let me try to identify generally what the trends are and what the lessons are in ITC's main businesses. This chart, a little crowded chart, but the first panel shows you the horizon in the cosmetic space. It tells you that our big three rivals are, say, L'Oreal, P&G, Unilever, and the top three put together have accounted for about 4,500 patents. These patents actually refer to, are deduped to one member per patent family. So we aren't counting every member of the family here. These would basically relate to a number of independent technologies. Similarly, in tobacco, the big three are Philip Morris, British American Tobacco, and Japan Tobacco Institute. And in foods, our rivals are Nestle, Kraft, and Unilever. What does it appear from this graph? It appears that in the main business areas of interest, our big three rivals outnumber us patent filing wise 50 to 1 to at least 500 to 1. We cannot really fight this kind of an inequity. So what do we do now? We try to drill down a little deeper and try to understand. Let's take the example of tobacco. We can see that in the last 5 years, Philip Morris has filed about 1,007 patents, independent patents, of which 152 have the potential to come to India one route or the other. In other words, the threat perception to the tobacco business would be from those 152. But the opportunity, that is 1,000 minus 152, would represent the opportunity space to tell us that these are patents which are never going to appear on Indian shores. So if we could use these as technology pivots to scope our own innovation program to develop a product which is really what the Indian consumer wants, based on an intimate understanding of Indian customer, his buying habits and preferences, we can really create a product based on patents which can satisfy an unmet need. Some more lessons emerge from this drill down analysis. It tells us that across the three businesses, they may appear diverse at first, cosmetics, tobacco, and foods. But it tells us that there are certain segments, such as processes and processing, packaging, machinery modifications. These appear to be the core enablers. So it's not that we need to have a patent, an invention in the area of tobacco, and a separate invention in the area of foods or cosmetics. Instead, if we tackle the core enablers, we account for about 50% of all patents filed. So let's stop treating the business sectors as cosmetics, tobacco, and food. Instead, let's treat them as machinery modifications, packaging, processes, and processing. So we've basically sliced the pie in a different way. The data is the same. Okay, let's talk a little about L'Oreal. And why is this important? L'Oreal, I mean, this is information from their annual report. They've been declaring it in their annual reports for the last 3 years that we have a next billion initiative planned. And what do they mean by the next billion initiative? It's not about how to raise the next $1 billion in revenue. It's about how to grab the next 1 billion new customers. They already have a customer base of 1.25 billion. And they believe they can suck up 1 billion customers more worldwide using the power of patents. And they report the number of patent filings in their annual report. They say we have 611 independent patent families in this year. And where do they believe the 1 billion customers, the 100 crore customers, where are they going to come from? They believe they are going to come from Brazil, Russia, India, China, and Mexico. Let's look at patent filings in these countries and the populations basically. If they want to suck up 100 crore customers, the contribution from Brazil, Russia, Mexico is not really large. Let's look at India and China. China just became the largest patent filing country in the world, December 2012. Population-wise, I mean, India is just about 10% less, but number of patents filed-wise, we are about 1/12. So if L'Oreal believes that it can grab 100 crore customers from these countries, a lot of the customers, the prospective consumers in China are basically protected by those local patents. So we believe that this is a threat to ITC. Not only is it a threat to ITC, it's a threat to, say, P&G in India, Unilever in India, Shiseido in India, a lot of the other companies, because ITC itself has a customer base of 6 crore. If they are going to suck up 60, 70 crores, not only we stand to lose, I mean, the others stand to lose as well. So we really need to have a proactive strategy on how to handle a threat of this nature. And we recognize that we need to have the numbers first. We need to have the quality, but we also need to have a lot of foot soldiers available to us. What is our position today? We only have a few hundred patents, a lot of them coming from one business alone. It compels us to have a very defensive position across ITC businesses. Our cash cow business doesn't have too many patents. So do we really believe that the safeguards are sufficient? Do we really have a credible stopping power against motivated, aggressive rivals that have a battery of patents? And do we really have any substantial bargaining position? Can we avoid getting sucked into litigation against our will? Because a series of patent litigations may be enough to sink the best of R&Ds. We have 350 scientists on campus. And back of the envelope calculation, it was believed that even if half of them file only one patent application each year, we are basically looking at 200 patents a year. So a target of about 1,000 or 1,500 patents within a reasonable time frame is not really beyond our reach. Now, this was a very modest expectation, but there were some disturbing analyses that came out. When we try to analyze where are our rivals filing for patents, we discover to our dismay that our competitors are filing patents in the areas that we consider ourselves to be strong. What will happen if we do nothing? A front-runner business will reach a few hundred patents. We'll reach about 300, 350 by 2017. So our competitive position, which was outflanked 50-1 or 500-1, I mean, marginalizes us even more. Hence, what are we looking at? We are looking at not incremental increases in patent filing, exponential increases. Let me briefly touch upon the topic of royalties now. Since 2009, the Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion removed the cap on payment of royalties. Let's look at the volume of the quantum of money entering India and how much money leaves India. In financial year 13, we had a money inflow of about 22 billion. The outflow was about 4.4 billion. In other words, 20% of the money entering India was basically leaving India. Why? On account of provisions given by GIPC to say that, well, if this constitutes technology transfer, the money spent on technology transfer can be taken off the tax returns. This was done with the idea of attracting high technology investments in India, such as in cryogenics, cryogenic engines, space, aviation power, but not necessarily for diapers, baby powder, shampoos, foods, clothes, toys. So how does this hurt a company like India, which is primarily an Indian company? We believe that the repatriation of money provision that is being offered to captive R&Ds in India, I mean, disturbs the level playing field, because many organizations treat this as a tax avoidance mechanism. If we believe that we need to create strong brands in India, we need to have the level playing field made equal. Because what's happening is, the India captive operations are basically the same entity as the principals. So is there really a technology transfer? And are we really getting high quality technology that India needs for its development? I mean, food for thought. Why is it necessary to have strong brands in India? I mean, we see from Korea's example that Samsung's revenue are about 20% of their GDP. I'll come back to this same point a little later. But let's look at what are the industries that are claiming repatriation of monies under royalties and taking this off their tax liabilities. It's in the areas of diapers, baby foods, formula foods, breakfast cereals, chocolates, candy, potato chips, beverages. I mean, these are technologies, good technologies, but